This is ACC Nation, your source for ACC sports coverage. Connect with us at accnation.net. Listen to our podcast and streaming radio. Watch us on YouTube and follow us on your favorite social media outlet. Now, here's Will and Jim.
USF at Miami. Welcome to ACC Nation. Our special guest is Mike Yam, host of CW's Football Saturday Countdown. In addition to that role, he's also studio host on the NFL Network and heard on Sirius XM. Mike is also an author, Fried Rice and Marinara. I'd really like to find out more about that. He previously hosted on the Pac-12 Network. He's been seen and heard across ESPN. His resume is, to say the least, a fascinating journey in sports journalism. Welcome, Mike.
Well, Jim, first of all, that's like one of the best introductions I've ever had. One. Two, thank you so much for having me on. I see you guys, a lot of times in my Google searches, the show pops up. So it's a thrill to be with both of you guys, talk about certainly a huge weekend on the CW, maybe the best game that we've ever had. And I'm going to automatically, Jim, right out of the gates, we're taking a hard right turn here. I feel like you should be, I live in LA now because NFL Network is based down here. I feel like you should have a gig, on one of these game shows to do these introductions. Will, do you hear the vocals there?
Oh, absolutely.
I feel like there's a Price is Right, next contestant, come on down, one of those deals. But Jim, seriously, you got some chops there.
Well, many years in broadcasting, so it's so thank you. And the check is in the mail, by the way, Mike. So just saying. Hey, game time is 4:30 on CW on Saturday. This is a spectacular setup. We've got a team that has defeated two top 25 ranked teams out of nowhere, amazingly, in Miami, ranked right up there at the top. So can they continue this domino effect or not? Will, it's all yours.
Yeah, Jim, I still look at the South Florida team, and you guys know this just from keeping a close eye on everything that's happening in college football. Look, this is, and we were talking off air about this, if you would have told me when I was at ACC Media Day sitting, 3 feet away from Mario Cristobal, this matchup would be this meaningful. In fact, we were actually banking. How about this is kind of a crazy story, Jim and Will. We were banking our feature content, right? And you're in a room, it's a little bit larger than essentially a closet. You got your cameras and you sit down and you do these features with a lot of these coaches and players, and sometimes you have to ask them questions about games that are well in advance. I mean, this is a week 3 matchup, right? I remember asking Mario, and I had to preface this with him because I hate to put coaches on the spot. Most of these guys just want to barely even want to talk about week 1. They just want to love up their team, talk about what we can expect. And Mario, I was fortunate. I got to know him when I was at Pac-12 Network. He was at Oregon. I said, Mario, we're doing this feature. I got to ask you about, South Florida because it's a game that we're going to have on our air. No problem. And it was this super open-ended generic question because you don't know how it's going to play out. But if you would have told me right now, this is a top 25 matchup, arguably the best game on the entire slate in college football, I would have said, I don't know how that's going to be possible. And yet this is where it is. Jim, right now, South Florida, tell me the team that's got a better resume than them. No one right now at this point of the season has a better resume than South Florida. It's impressive. Boise, I feel good about them this season. I think the fact that they throttled their opponent in week number 2, I think kind of puts them back into the mix. But to take out a Florida team, top 25, the way that they did, dramatic fashion, where there is a certain level of moxie, right? I think if you hear some of the interviews with their coaching staff, the last couple seasons, there might have been just this much doubt that they could compete with some of the big boys in the country. And I think they come into this game ridiculously confident. I think it's still going to be an uphill battle. I love what Mario's been able to build, but I think if you set this up from a Bulls perspective, guys, you're looking at a team that's got plus 30 seniors, maybe 33, 34 seniors on this roster, top 2 recruiting classes the last 2 years in the American Conference. This is not a team that I think should be taken lightly. And I think Mario is going to look at the film. He's going to play it for his guys and say, hey, look at what they did against Florida. We got to show up for this one.
Yeah. Well,
yeah, absolutely, Mike. And there are a couple of key matchups I want to get into over the course of this interview, but I want to first start with the South Florida part. You mentioned probably the biggest thing about that offense is Byron Brown is a quarterback that I don't think a lot of people nationally know, even though they say he's a lot of the reason USF's offense is what it is. However, I also wonder if because they've had so many big plays, if that's something that could be sustainable going forward.
Yeah, look, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head on the perception of Brown. And I think maybe this is a very different conversation, Will, if Brown's able to stay healthy last year. I think we played like, 7, 8 games, has an injury, misses the remainder of the season. And I think that conversation completely shifts. And, if they have the success that I think they could have had a year ago, maybe this is a South Florida team that wouldn't have been a surprise in week one, wouldn't have been necessarily a surprise in week number two with this victory. And that narrative might be different. But I'm with you, Will. Like, he is clearly the guy that is, stirring the drink, the straw in that drink, so to speak. You see what he's been able to do from an offensive standpoint, play efficiently, extend plays with his legs. There's a lot of things that we've seen on film from him that make you pause and say, hey, like, this is a real dude. And I think in the landscape of college football, we feel like we have a good handle, especially at that quarterback spot, on who the premier players are. And yet, like, I think about Cal's quarterback, this is a freshman who comes in who's just slinging, daggers all over the field. And I don't know how many people would have thought that he would have been able to be this effective this early on. And I think the same could be said for Brown, certainly different circumstances. But I think your point is well taken, Will. Like, I don't know nationally how many people before this game, they certainly know who he is now, coming off that win against Florida and 2 top 25 victories. I don't know how many people would have pointed to him as one of the best quarterbacks in the country, but I think he's in that conversation right now.
One of the key matchups to me of this game is Brown on the offense against that defensive line of Miami with Ruben Bay and Akeem Mesidor, and those two, they've wreaked havoc on Notre Dame, obviously the FCS opponent last year. And I feel like this is going to be one of the big key matchups in this game.
No question. And I think, I think I'm flashing back to some of the highlights and even watching that Notre Dame game and Bain just being a game wrecker out on that football field, especially late in that game, the big hit. I still, and I think you're right here. And I think the chess match that we're going to see is really significant because you could talk about this D line. Offensive line right now has been really good. And Miami's been terrific in the trenches. And candidly, I don't think anyone's surprised when Mario Cristobal took over that program that this is how he was going to build this team. But when I look at this particular matchup, can South Florida's offensive line hold up on a consistent basis? There's a part of me, Will, that says, yeah, well, why not? They got it done against Boise. And this is a Florida team that, I don't think they're as talented as Miami's team, but it's not like it's the Little Sisters of the Poor that they're throwing out there. We're still talking about, an SEC program that's got plenty of firepower, 5-star recruits that really should have won that game, at least when you look at it face value on paper. I do think that this is a different beast in Miami. Like, heading into the year, there might have been some questions about this squad. Can they win these big games? Well, I'll tell you what, to go and start off the year with, a top 25 win against a Notre Dame team who I feel pretty good about, just generally speaking, I think speaks volumes to where this team is going. And I think some of the learnings that Mario has had the last 2 years is really impacting what we're seeing on the product through the first 2 weeks of this season. This team will be ready. And I think, Will, to your point, D-line, they got some game wreckers, but I think the most important aspect of this, South Florida's defense has been really, really strong in these first 2 weeks. Can it hold up? Can they create pressure against what I would call one of the, if not the best offensive line in the entire country? Carson Beck's going to be in the Heisman conversation by the end of the season. I'm convinced of that. The efficiency numbers are going to be there. The wins are going to be there, and he's going to put up just monster numbers. But if you look at how effective this offensive line has been in the last 2 weeks, the amount of clean pockets that he has had, it shouldn't be surprised that he's had this much success. And I get it. Week 2, they should have throttled, a lesser opponent, and they did exactly that. But can South Florida be disruptive? Can they make it a little uncomfortable for Carson Beck? Because that would be the first time that we're going to see that on a consistent level. And I do think this defense is really good. I just don't know if it matches up effectively against Miami's offensive line right now.
The other key to this game is one you just talked about is Carson Beck, and looks like he's more back to his 2023 self than 2024 self. And one of the questions about Miami coming into the season was skill position at receiver. It looks like they have a couple of guys, Malachi Tony, or I think that's his name, the freshman, against this USF secondary. I think this is another key matchup of this game.
Look, you're seeing explosive plays on the field, and I think there's no question you can point to, once again, this roster from Miami and feel really confident that they have a great opportunity to go and win this game. And you're right. The one thing that I would, once again, consistently point to, Carson Beck has shown that he can win at the highest level, right? Like, if you can navigate the SEC and win those SEC championships the way that they did, clearly the guy can play play. I would also make an argument based off of what I saw last year, because I've heard that phrase used a lot. Will the 2023 Carson Beck, for example, and like what he was able to accomplish, and maybe some hiccups. The last season, you look at some stretches where there's some picks that are thrown. I don't know if that's all on Carson, right? Like I still look at, a Georgia team that, was one of the leaders in the country in terms of drop passes. That becomes, typically an issue there. I've seen that across the board. And it actually reminds me of some quarterbacks that I've seen in their time, just even in the Pac-12 conference when, there's an Oregon quarterback that I'm certainly thinking of in Bo Nix, who's been very effective at the NFL level. And there's a time you can go and look at some of the drops that he had offensively. And, like that kind of creeps, I think, into a quarterback's mind, maybe just a little extra pressure to sort of fit it in a smaller window, in a tighter window. And sometimes the ball sailed from him. So for as much as I would look at some of those interceptions, that offensive line last season compared to 2 seasons ago, I thought it was better 2 years ago. I think there's some factors that are at play, but I've seen what Cam Ward was able to do at Washington State and then what he did leading the country last year at Miami. And I think once again, we're going to have a similar conversation about Carson Beck as the year unfolds.
Jim?
So, Mike, one of the things that I see that is a deciding factor in this game, and let's see how you measure this up, because you see a lot of this in the NFL, it's about depth and experience, how deep you go, and how long you can go. I'm seeing teams getting gassed in the third quarter, and they shouldn't be getting gassed that early in college ball, much less the pros, but it happens. In this particular instance, I'm wondering, because Miami went toe-to-toe with Notre Dame, and that's a deep team with a lot of experience and held up. I'm wondering if USF has the same capability of going toe-to-toe with Miami.
Yeah, Jim, I think that's the million-dollar question. And if you believe that South Florida can win this game, the answer to your question is yes, because I think from a frontline talent standpoint, maybe the best way to describe this a couple years ago, and it's actually more than a few years at this point, but Washington, I was covering the Washington Huskies and Chris Peterson was there. They get to a college football playoff. They match up against Alabama. They don't win that game. That was the team that had Jake Browning and John Ross and Dante Pettis, who's still playing in the league right now. And I remember matching up, and I remember watching the game and the conversation before the game. And you could look pound for pound, size for size, that starting lineup compared to Alabama's. And you go, like, those boys can play with those dudes. Like, there's no question. But as the game unfolded, the second wave, the third wave of players that were stepping out onto the field, and you said, oh, this is just different. Washington doesn't have that type of depth. There's a good football team, great football team. They're able to get to the college football playoff, but that was a differentiator. Now, the landscape of college football has changed because of the portal and NIL and those types of things. But I think to your question, South Florida, and I made reference to this, there's experience that's on that roster. They got over 30 seniors that are ready to go. They've done a really nice job the last couple seasons in terms of developing their players and also recruiting those players. Top recruiting class last 2 years in the American, which I made reference to before. I don't know if they have truly the depth that Miami does. And to be honest with you, I'd almost be shocked to say that they do have that depth based off of the type of relentless recruiter that Mario Cristobal is, coaching at a place like Miami where they're supposed to have all the dudes. And quite frankly, they have had those guys. I was with Mario down at the East West Shrine Bowl. I was calling that game on NFL Network, revolving door of Miami players that are just stepping out onto that field. Like, there are real guys that are going to be playing on Sundays on this Miami roster. Make the same exact case for South Florida. I just think there's more on the Miami side. So if you said to me like, hey, pick this game, there's a part of me that says, hey, South Florida can ball. If they have the depth that's better than I think, they're absolutely going to be able to stay competitive in this game and maybe even win. And for anyone who's, sort of doubting that, I would say, I feel good about Boise State. I feel good about Florida, and they beat those teams. So to me, there's going to be some juice here in this one.
It sounds like a fun day. I'm going to be watching very closely. The other thing that I really want to know is sometimes if a team comes out of the chute really quickly and starts putting points up on the board, that sometimes can shut down the other side.
Totally.
Mentally, physically, whatever, and that might be the game right there. What is it that USF has to do in order to be the bull in the china shop?
Yeah, I think it's actually a really good point. And I've seen some of these interviews now where I think in the last couple seasons, there might have been this much doubt for the South Florida team against really high level competition. And maybe in some of those critical moments, they shrunk. I mentioned this to you guys before. I think they come in insanely confident. I think if you are a college student on that campus, there's now buzz, there's juice. You turn on the TV and people are talking about South Florida. They're talking about an investment in this program. They just opened a over $20 million facility a couple of years ago, got a new stadium, a couple hundred million to go and put up. Like there are resources now being allocated and a commitment to go and win football games. But I think to your point, you know, a confident team can get shook pretty quick when you see dudes who look like the guys that Miami has. I do think that because this team has been anchored these first couple of weeks on their defense, because we're always going to talk about quarterbacks and the skill position guys. If you watch the tape and you see how these results have been, Brown's certainly done a remarkable job, and you got to score to go and win. But I still think the identity of this team centers on their defense. I would be almost surprised if Miami can get out of the gate very quickly. And if they do, I think the biggest telltale sign is, you know, how, does this team fold at halftime? Are there enough adjustments where they're able to stay competitive? Because now we're seeing this, right? You know, last week on the CW, we had SMU and Baylor. SMU outplayed Baylor basically the entire game, and then they lost this game. And things like that happen because there's a mental fortitude aspect of it that Baylor showcased in this game. You know, Will, you know this, man. You're a Vikings fan. You saw that you know Chicago on Monday night, they outplayed for the most part. For 3 quarters, outplayed the Vikings. And you saw this young JJ McCarthy in the fourth quarter sort of like shake off a bad pick six and go, you know what, I got this, and settle down. And I get it. It's different. It's not apples to apples when you talk about the NFL game. I think it's almost like 2 different sports sometimes when I'm watching games on Saturday and then I flip on Sunday to watch some of these games. But Jim, if South Florida can stay close defensively, I think it does 2 things. One, it keeps them really confident and they start believing. And then 2, I think it does the exact opposite on the Miami side, where Miami's like, oh, what's going on? Like, this is not a cakewalk. We should be throttling these guys. And then they start feeling tighter. And then they feel like, you know, maybe there's more pressure on us to go and win this game.
Interesting. Will?
Yeah. In the time we have left, I kind of want to scatter shoot around the ACC, but first things first, just kind of looking at where we are. I mean, we're only 1-6 through the regular season. Do you see Miami as the team to beat right now?
In this conference?
Yes.
Look, I think they're there. I think Florida State is a team that would scare the bejesus out of me. I think the boost with Tommy, who's got this moxie and swag. My colleague at NFL Network and the CW is Will Blackman, and he was actually on that staff at Boston College. And when we were hanging out in Charlotte, I had asked him about Tommy and, like, you know, just his ability to go and win. I think when a dude talks max about Alabama in the offseason and gets as much criticism as he did, and then he backs it up the way that he did, you go, oh, like, hey, maybe there's something there and there's some juice. And his teammates, when I talked to his teammates at Florida State, they'd said, oh, we like that he did that. I think, to me, they're still a dangerous team. I still think the jury's out right now on Clemson. I get it where we're at. The Troy game last week being a little bit closer. The week 1 loss to LSU. Week 1 is just so hard, right? It's so awesome because we had such an epic week 1 in college football, and we're going to focus and gravitate our attention to those results at the end of the year. And people are going to say, well, look at this team. They beat them and that did. I get that. But there is something called evolution of a season. And for a team, I think it's just, you know, it's kind of crappy, to be honest with you, that Clemson had lost it in week number 1 the way that they did. Miami, to me, I think is in that driver's seat. I'm not going to count out Clemson. I think they have plenty of NFL dudes that are on that roster that can make a run. You know, the game against Georgia Tech will be telling, because I think Georgia Tech brings sort of like this toughness factor that's there. But if you said to me right now who should be in the driver's seat, the way SMU lost, the fact that Miami's winning, and the way Miami's winning, and there's not much of a drop off in terms of their offense from last year with Cam Ward to now obviously with Carson, I would lean that way.
Are you surprised Bill Belichick's kind of gotten out of the gate slow at UNC?
It's a really good question, Will. So there's a part of me that wants to say, yeah, of course, it's Bill Belichick, and look at the Super Bowl titles, and look at the reverence and what he was able to do. And of course, like, why should that team started slow? There's that old phrase. It's not, it's not about the X's and O's. It's about the Jimmies and Joes. I am a huge believer in that phrase and that mantra. Great coaching can it take a good player and make them great, or an average player and make them really good? And I think from a scheme standpoint, those are all things and coaching that Bill Belichick can do. I think it's really hard to overcome in college football, taking a job when he did, not being in the college game, then having to go and recruit and build a team and essentially start from scratch. I mean, it is hard to win with a brand new roster. And I think that the national narrative did, and Bill's success did him no favors. And that's a good thing, right? Like there was pressure on him because of what he was able to do with the New England Patriots and win. I just think it's really hard. I mean, you could take the greatest coach of all time. And by the way, you can make an argument Bill Belichick might be one of those guys. Look what happens if you give Bill a roster that's essentially brand new. They haven't played together. And quite frankly, isn't as good as the other rosters, and go, hey, go win ball games. Like, I just think that's a really tough task. So I pause because I say, damn, it's Bill Belichick. And when I'm down at ACC Media Day and I see these players kind of in awe of Bill, and they go, yo, that's Brady's guy, right? Like there's something really cool about that. But I wouldn't be surprised. And by the way, it's not about week 1. It's not about week 2. It's not even about week 3. I would say, what's the foundation that Bill's setting in place in year 1 for this program? Like you take over a program and this is a brand new roster. There's that other phrase. One of my old colleagues who calls games over at Big Ten Network now, and I worked with him, and that's Yogi Roth at Pac-12 Network, used to say, hey, year 1 for a new coaching staff, lose big. Year 2, lose a little bit smaller. Year 3, win small. Year 4, win big. And I think we are still in the early stretches of Belichick's time right now with Carolina. Not ready to hit the panic button. I think he's going to be A-okay.
Jim, any final questions?
Yes, real quickly, as I mentioned, Mike is an author of Fried Rice and Marinara, and I'd want to know the background on this.
Well, I appreciate that. And anyone who's watching, that's actually some of the characters in the photo back there. It was a huge passion project for me, Jim. I actually have another book that's coming out in a couple months, but Fried Rice and Marinara, it's available like on Amazon. You can also watch it. It's fully animated on YouTube for free. But the story is, and the premise is Mikey is Chinese and Italian. I'm Chinese and Italian. And for his 4th birthday, he doesn't know if he should have Chinese food or Italian food. He feels like he's getting pulled in multiple directions. And he decides, I'm going to combine it. And he makes fried rice and marinara, and the kids love it. The reality, Jim, and the reason why it was a passion project when I was growing up, I wanted to be a pediatrician. I had no idea that being like a sportscaster was like an actual thing. And I was a huge sports fan, and I watched the games. And it wasn't until I got to college and I saw Michael Kim on ESPN at the time, and I was like, oh man, it's like an Asian dude doing sports. And I never saw it before. And it planted the seed in my head. And over the years, I've been really fortunate to be in a lot of college classrooms, and I get invited, and I love it. It's one of my favorite things to do because I got so much out of it when I was a kid and when I was still in school. And it dawned on me, I'm like, hey, like, how come I'm just not really seeing a bunch of like, Asian people, like, or, just minorities in general, like going down this path. And I realized, at least for me, I never had a story as a kid. I had all these books that my mom would read to me at night, but I never had a character that that looked like me, that was doing something. I never saw like an Asian sportscaster on. So in my mind, that's the reason why I did the book, just to kind of put like in mainstream, hey, here's an Asian male character in a leading role, something that we don't really see too much of. And I loved it. It sort of led to the second one, which is coming out pretty soon, that's got a sports broadcasting football tie into it. So I'm really excited. But I do appreciate Jim asking about it.
Very cool. I'm going to check that out and invite everyone else to do that. First timers on this program, Mike, always get to answer the following question.
Oh, okay. Here we go.
What's your favorite food? Because now that you've tossed out fried rice and marinara, what is your favorite food?
Yeah.
Or is it a combination there?
For sure. I feel like I have no choice but to answer fried rice and marinara. And I've been asked many times, do you eat that regularly? And I always say, I've never consciously had fried rice and marinara, but there was always this cross-pollination on my plate, because we would have legitimately Chinese food and Italian food at my birthday parties as a kid. And I know I've had fried rice and marinara, but just like unknowingly. But I still think to this day, pizza is the most versatile food in the history of the world, because you could have it for breakfast, lunch, or dinner. And Lord knows, I went to school. I went to Fordham in the Bronx. We had some great pizzerias in the area. I would have pizza pretty consistently for breakfast as I walked to my classes in the morning. So if anyone ever doubts that, and we all know about cold pizza, so you can do that as well. So I think it's still, top shelf in terms of the food options out there.
Good stuff. Have a slice walking down the street.
Yes.
That's the way to do it. And because I'm the guy that asks questions like this, pineapple on pizza?
No, can't do it. Can't do it. Will, I know you're buying what I'm selling here. That is still like, no, that's a party foul. Like the pineapple's for like the dessert, or just you put it on a ham. You don't put it on pizza. I'm not there. Not buying that one. Not buying that one.
Great look at USF at Miami with our special guest, Mike Yam, host of CW's Football Saturday Countdown. You can also check him out on the NFL Network and hear him on Sirius XM. Mike, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your thoughts and perspectives on not only this game, but the ACC and football in general across college and into the NFL, and a little bit about food as well.
Yes. Yeah, we always got to sprinkle that into the conversation. I appreciate the invite, guys. I know it's the first time I was on with you, so hopefully we get to do this again down the road.
Thanks, Mike.
ACC Nation, your source for ACC sports coverage with Will and Jim. Be sure to like, subscribe, and follow us on our podcast, streaming radio, and YouTube. Connect with us on Blue Sky, Reddit, Instagram, Threads, Mastodon, Facebook, X, and LinkedIn.